There's sort of two distinct lines that we can talk about there. One's sort of contemplative realization and one's faith development. And there's a question, because in the Christian tradition we have a robust history of developmentalism. Oh, that's really crap, I'm terribly sorry. But sticking to Dionysius, right, we've got purification, illumination, and union, if you like, as the sort of three stages the monk goes through in the development of realization, or therapia, theoria, and theosis, okay? Isaac the Syrian's got repentance, purification, and, oh boy, the other purification. John Climacus has, his own model. The Westerners, Bernard of Clairvaux and John of the Cross. Anybody that spends any time in monastic life notices that the ability of students to be able to deepen into prayer, or to be able to stabilize meditation, or to deepen into insight, depending on exactly which meditational tradition you're in, goes through a series of stages, which begin in the physical, begin in the sort of gross, concrete, physical realm of the matter, and kind of deepen into the kind of the imagistic, kind of light-filled, kind of inner, subtle aspects of what you're doing, and then deepen and drop further into the kind of, through the cloud of unknowing, if you like, to the ground of being, to the causal, to the dark core of who we are. And that's a particular state sequence, which the exact characteristics of it vary depending on the meditation technique that you're using, but the broad contour of it, from concrete to subtle to causal, is a fairly universal stretch of stages across different meditational traditions. Now we're left with a little puzzler here, right? We've got these stages of cognitive development, there's these sort of stages of development posed by various Western developmentalists, and we've got, certainly in the East of the Christian Church and in Buddhism and in Hinduism, all these models of advancement through contemplative states. So how do we accommodate these two different, are they just two different lines in Wilber's terms, or how do they fit together? So the trend in transpersonal psychology in the early 70s was to fit them together kind of like this. You say that we go through, so this is Wilber's original spectrum of consciousness diagram. It kind of says, well, we go through all of Piaget's stages, right? And then there's this great stage called vision logic, where your kind of mind gets blown out to the sort of cosmic level. And then you go through psychic, subtle, causal, which are the sort of classic, a different version of the classic sort of three stages of contemplative realization. And so that's human development. There you go, right there. That's the spectrum of human consciousness. We sort of go through normal Western adult development, and then there's these terrific contemplative stages that happen on the end. It's got an elegance to it, doesn't it? Plus, it looks like a feather, which is cool. Unfortunately, it's completely wrong.
Unfortunately, it's not.
That's not how it happens at all. The actual fact of them, I mean, in terms of just actually meeting human beings and actually noticing what's going on for them, you get people at all kinds of structural state stages, if you like, at various different, structural stages at various different state stages. So people can be at a subtle stage of realization and be at a vision logic cognitive stage, and that's not a problem at all. So the original kind of stacking the two models on top of one another kind of folded down into what was called in the early 90s the Wilber-Combs lattice. So this is really way too much detail for an introductory talk, but I just wanted to, there's various ways in which stuff that you've heard already combines with stuff that I'm telling you today to make certain structures which probably don't work well. So I'm doing this to kind of just tease out some of that potential stuff. And I'm talking to you, viewers on YouTube, because there's a lot more of you that are in this room. Okay. So, the Wilber-Combs lattice kind of says there's the structure stages, and Fowler's model is one of the structure stage models, that the human mind kind of evolves through these structural stages. And there's the state stages, gross, subtle, causal, non-dual, and they're distinct. So that someone can have a non-dual realization, but be at a mythic level of cognitive development. So, for instance, someone in a traditional society in Tibet in the 13th century isn't at a pluralistic stage. They've never run into another culture. They don't, they don't understand how an aeroplane works. They don't have access to higher mathematics. That doesn't diminish the fact that they've got a contemplative realization that could be at a very advanced stage. And so similarly, someone could be at a very advanced stage, for instance, in their cognitive line, but have no contemplative realization at all. I'm sure Dr. Bien is familiar with many such people at work. The trick is that when you spend all your time, if you're academics that spend all their time reading lots of advanced contemplative text, can con themselves into thinking that they're up here somewhere, and actually they're over here somewhere. So, it's an important little knot. That was quite a big download of stuff. I'll just pause for another second. Any? No, it's kind of broadly familiar. Everyone's okay? Any questions? Brenny, cool? Yeah, good. Okay. Right. So that's thought of the huge aside. I can step back from the huge aside to the main body of the talk, and let's leap into James Fowler's actual stages. The primal stage, stage 0, is verbal infancy, pre-verbal infancy. So it's before you've started to talk. It's before you've started to really differentiate as a separate individual. It's the sort of 0 to 1 kind of stage in terms of human age. So this is really before faith development properly starts, but it's an age in which some of the really crucial, what James Fowler calls pre-images of the holy, begin to be formed. So it's at this age where stuff like attachment stuff happens. The reliability and security of your attachment to your primary caregiver, whether that's your mother or your father, is formed. Are they reliably there when you need them? Is food available when you ask for it? Are you held? Do you know you're loved at that kind of really primal stage? So the basic sense of trust, is life a happy place? Does the world look after me? Am I cared for? So trust, hope, courage, am I encouraged to move forward into the next thing I need to do? Or am I in some way held back? So we're only, Rowley in his talk kind of said, it's true that we're really only in the last 20, 30 years starting to understand how absolutely critical this first year of life really is in the formation of your basic orientation towards the world. This is the stuff that forms whether you think the world is fundamentally good or whether you think the world is fundamentally terrifying and you need to retreat from it. And it makes a vast difference. The first month of life is so important in a child's life. So there's a couple of problems that happen that potentially arise at this stage. And one of them is that you think that the whole world is you and you never shift that perception. And that's where narcissism tends to come from, that you kind of control the whole world in order to make things work for you. And the other is that you're not met in your need for connection with other human beings, and you end up feeling isolated and cut off and withdrawn. All of us have both those things to some extent, but for some people it's a pathological step. So we step out of that primal, undifferentiated phase into stage 1, and we do that by really forming language. And we form language in order to get our needs met. Food!
And you meaning language here specifically as spoken verbal structures?
Yeah, the formation of spoken verbal structures. So, okay, rather than immediately leaping into telling you about it, I'm going to let somebody else tell you about it.
I feel like I am the center of the world. Everything important to me is there because of me, to be for me. When we travel at night, the moon follows just our car. Flowers are there to smell with, and stars are there to fly to. Sometimes I have scary dreams at night. They all right there in my room. If you were in the room with me, you could see them too. Sometimes during the daytime, I think about things like are in my dreams. Sometimes they make me scared. I wonder sometimes where heaven is, and what being dead means. If it is like a monster taking people away, or if it hurts, or if Mommy and Daddy will be there with me. What happened to our pet bird, the neighbor's cat got? My friend told me that the devil will come up out of a hole in the ground and get me if I'm not careful. so now I won't play in the backyard by myself. I think about God a lot. I think God must be like the air, everywhere. Can God see me? Will God keep our house from fire? Is Granddad with God? Where's that?
That's obviously an adult man, but he's reading from a transcript. I think a composite transcript of a set of kids that Fowler interviewed at that age. So what popped out for you from that transcript? What did you notice? Is there any pattern?
It's a big disconnect from the world. Like the world is just this really scary place when they think of it outside of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of fear there.
But there's also an attempt to engage that fear and to try to make sense of it and try to give it a coherent shape and give it a form and say, oh well, there must be some place that Granddad went to. There must be some place that the bird went to.
Right.
There must be some place where the monsters come from.
Right.
But he has no idea what it
He has no idea what it is. Yeah.
What did you notice about the form that he gave those things, though?
The interrogative. The question.
No. What form was the, like he was creating a form for where is Granddad? Where does Satan come out of?
Yeah.
Where is God? Where did my bird go?
Yeah, they're all interrogatives.
They're all interrogative, but they're concrete. They're all concrete things. God is like air. He's everywhere. Is Granddad with God, or is Granddad somewhere else? Where did my bird go to? You know. So there's no. It's not at a. It's not a conceptual level. There's no sense of there being an abstract or a transcendent so much. It's a concrete, physical.
Geographical.
Yeah. Satan comes out of a hole in the ground and eats us up. Right. God saves our house from repossession. No, fire. Okay.
The ones that were chosen there, it surprises me how few subpersonalities were really in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that was a function of the questions that were really
Quite
asked.
likely.
That it's invoking one thing, so there's not a very well-rounded aspect to what it is that they're saying.
No.
You know, some of the things like, well, the moon follows just our car and stuff like that. You know, that's showing some of those very self-centered, narcissistic kind of tendencies, which, depending on the age of the people that are saying it, I bet not. But even though there's an inquisitiveness, it's based on what they've been told, and you know, a friend told me that the devil will come out of the ground kind
That's
of
right.
thing.
That's right.
Yeah, there's no experiential basis there,
Yeah.
and it's not. I don't think you're really getting a full scope of the people.
Of the human being, no, because it's guided around a set of questions. You know, what are and it's about the big questions. You know, what about death? What about God? What about where do people come from? Where do they go to? What about the stars? How are things? That's the kind of structure of the interview. So it does, it's a slice through the human being. It's not the whole of the human being. There is, as well as all the scary stuff, there was a big chunk of scary stuff in the middle, but right at the beginning there was quite a lot of magical stuff. You know, the moon follows just our car, and stars are there to fly to, and flowers are there to smell with, and that sort of lovely stuff, right? So
It's still, even stars are there to fly to.
There's an
That's
escapism there.
There's an escapism, but also that just reeks of something that they were told.
yeah,
You know, it's not something that I think a very small child would think of immediately.
probably not. No.
Yeah.
So we're in 2 to 6. We're in the sort of 2 to 6 range, and it's a probably a synthesis of a few different things.
Yeah.
Like the kid wouldn't have said, a child wouldn't say, the moon follows just our car. The interviewer would say something like, what do you think of the moon? Or the moon follows our car. Does it follow just your car, or does it follow everybody's car? It follows just our car, and right. So
Yes.
I've read some of the transcripts of the interviews, and it's very much like that, where the interviewer kind of asks more questions of the child and to kind of pin down, how do you really think this works? Like, how do you think that actually fits together? And it's quite... So intuitive projective stage 1, which is this early childhood stage, it's beautiful in a lot of ways. It's terrifying and beautiful because it's all about imagination and fantasy and imitation and dreams and all that sort of stuff. It's imitative, exactly. So adults say things, the kid, repeats them back to the adult, kind of in it. It's really strongly imagistic. And there's a sort of a projection of all those images out on the world. There's no real distinction between the image and the fantasy and what goes on in the world. That's something that develops later slowly. And at the start of this stage, if you think it, or someone says it, it's probably real. The neighbour said that Satan comes out of a hole in the ground, and so that must be what happens, and I'm not going to play in the backyard anymore, right? So there's not a strong ability to distinguish between fantasy and reality. The whole thing sort of is this very soft, blurry territory. What I dream is probably, I dream about monsters, therefore there's monsters. Don't tell me your dreams about monsters, because I might dream about monsters, and then there'll be monsters, and then bad things will happen, So you see this with little kids, right? There's this kind of, this very sort of soft relationship between imagination and what's real. The other thing is this is sort of more into sort of Keegan's sort of notions of development, but it's dominated by impulses. It's very self-centered. The kid sort of feels something. What's the sort of saying? Kids don't have anger. Anger has kids. You see a kid when they get furious, and it's kind of like the entirety of reality is now my fury, and you'll get out of my way, right? So the first impulses of faith, the kind of pre-verbal impulses of faith, happen at that pre-stage. But what begins to happen now is that images begin to get formed onto those first things. So what happens at this stage is you begin to adopt some of the first pictures, some of the first words, some of the first sounds and smells of what faith is. Who is God? Where is God? What does God look like? What does Jesus look like? What does Buddha look like? What is the Dharma? How does, it's varying in varying faith traditions, obviously, but the content of it all change, but it's the images and pictures. This is where you start to sort of notice the colours of things in your religious tradition and how the ritual fits together. And it's before story, though, right? This is the trick. The story hasn't happened yet. So the ability to kind of chain things together in logical sequence it certainly hasn't emerged at the beginning. It's just pictures. And then as you start to move through the stage, that ability to sort of arrange things in stories. So you notice kids, when they start to get verbal, they're very keen to try and tell you a story, and they're terrible stories, because it's just a sequence of things that happened that has no logical relationship. And then I went to Susan's house, and then there was a cat, and then we had ice cream, and then we came home, and then Mum came home, and then there was more ice cream, and then there was another cat, and then... Non-parent, sorry, low tolerance for... Here's an idea, if you're going to tell a story, have a point! Okay, so that's intuitive projective. It's very, very early, so it's beginning to form those first sort of images. So I've sort of foreshadowed this, but what begins to kind of... The way the child begins to kind of edge out of this first stage is they start to develop the cognitive ability to understand causation and logic. That this thing follows that thing because that's how things work. When you do this first, then this always happens second. And what follows the ability to sort of understand those sorts of operations, those concrete operations, logical entailment, causation, is you start to develop the ability for narrative. So that's the next stage, which is mythic literal.